Hey crafty friends, Einat Kessler here with Saturday Extravaganza. Thank you very much for joining me, and today we are cooking another 3-to-1 recipe. So I'm going to use one 12 by 12 cardstock with one photo, and from another paper I'm going to just tear 3 pieces of cardstock. I'm using blue fern papers. They have really thick, beautiful papers. I really like using them. So our recipe today is going to be 3 paper flower techniques, 2 stencils, and 1 acrylic medium. So the first paper flower technique is really simple. It's called fussy cutting. You probably know this. We have sometimes on paper beautiful flower patterns, and I really like to sometimes cut them out with small scissors. Some people don't have the patience for fussy cutting, but I can just sit for hours and cut stuff. My students in my workshop, in some of my workshops, always call me the cutting queen because I can cut for hours, and I have small hands and small fingers, so I have no problems cutting even the smallest things. If you don't like cutting, you can just use stickers or cutouts or dies or whatever. So that was the first technique. The second technique is also very easy, and you probably already know it, but it's always good to revisit it. You just cut a piece of cardstock. You need a double-sided cardstock for this, and you cut a spiral in a square. There are no measurements. The larger the square, the larger the flower will be. And then you simply roll the spiral inwards. And while you roll it, you get a really nice flower. And if you wanted the red color to be visible, then you need to turn your paper like I just did and start all over again. Basically, the color of the paper you want shown needs to be on the top while you roll your paper. So that's a really good tip for you to remember, because sometimes double-sided cardstock have completely different colors on both sides. So I'm just gluing it down, and I'm gonna make 2 more. And then the third technique is just using a punch, a flower punch. I've punched 3 flowers, and I'm gonna wrinkle them, but because it's a really thick cardstock, I need to wet them first just to break the fibers a little bit and make them a little bit more flexible. So that's another good tip for you, how to treat paper when you want it to do what you want it to do and it doesn't cooperate. Just spritz it with some water. So after wrinkling them, make sure they're completely dry. And now we can start assembling our flower. So the first flower, I'm just cutting one of the petals out. The other one I'm just slitting between 2 petals, and the third one I'm leaving untouched. And what we're gonna do is assemble 3 layers of the flower. The first one that we have a slit, we're gonna close them and thereby making them a little bit smaller. So the first one stays as it is, and the other one we are just gluing down the 2 joining petals, that the one petal next to the other petal, we're just gluing them down together, one on top of the other, and that will make them smaller and a little bit more 3D. And then after they're ready, we can layer them one on top of the other with some foam tape to get more dimension. So now we have our 3 flowers. 3 techniques for creating paper flowers, and the 2 part of our layout will be using 2 stencils. I just want to cut little bit of leaves. They're gonna go with the flowers. So now that we've arranged everything, I'm ready to glue everything down. And I'm just gonna ink the edges of the paper pieces that I'm using as a mat for the photo with some red distress ink that coordinates beautifully with the red on the paper. And I'm going to glue them down to my layout with, again, some foam tape for more dimension. I like dimension on my layouts, and foam tape can create miracles, adding dimension to stuff. So as you can see, I'm not using dots, I'm just using a roll of foam tape, and I'm cutting whatever size I need. This is the kind I like to use. Some people use the foam dots, and it's up to you what you like and what's more comfortable. So I'm adding my pieces of paper. I'm adding a little bit more foam tape for more support, and I want this one to go on the bottom. It's slightly too big, so I'm just gonna tear it down a little bit. And sometimes my glue, when it's almost finishing, does not cooperate as fast as I would like it to. Now for the photo, adding the photo, and I'm going to add my 2 stencils. This is the first stencil, and I'm using 1 acrylic medium for everything on this layout, and that is gesso. So there's our recipe: 3 flower techniques, 2 stencils, and 1 acrylic medium, which is gesso. So I really like this pattern. I'm adding it here as an embellishment, and this is using gesso as modeling paste. Gesso is really versatile, so you can use it in so many different ways. So the first way is using it as modeling paste with a stencil. Dry everything, of course, and then add all your flowers. So I'm going to add the cut flower first, the one that I've cut from the paper. It's going to go up there. And now the other flowers that we created, the layered flower and the spiral flowers. And since it's a double-sided cardstock, you can create 2 colors of flowers simply by rolling it in the different direction. So now we have the flowers, and I'm going to add the leaves. Remember, we cut some leaves as well. Add them too. Just curling them a little bit with my finger. Okay, so I want to add a little bit more stenciling with that beautiful pattern down here. Nice. And I want to add a chipboard title to my layout, so I'm just going to color it with spray. Now, instead of spraying it and wasting all this beautiful shimmery spray, I'm just going to use the edge of the sprayer and simply color the letters. Now, they're so thin and so delicate that really just spraying them would waste so much spray. So it maybe takes a little bit more time, but you really save on your supplies and you get the exact same effect. So I'm drawing that, and I can add it to my layout. This one's a little bit wet, so I just want to make sure it's dry. Otherwise everything would smear if you use acrylic medium, sprays and stuff like that, paints. Always make sure it's dry, otherwise you'll get a big mess on your layout. So I'm just going to add, before the title, I just want to add my second stencil. Remember, we used one and this is the second. So I'm creating butterflies with the distress ink, and now I'm using the gesso as paint, as white paint, smearing it on the ink and basically mixing them together, creating a really cool effect. So I'm first using the distress ink to stencil the butterfly, and then while the stencil is still there, I'm adding a little bit of gesso with my finger as a white paint, and that creates a really beautiful effect. And you get two tones butterflies. Isn't that cool? So now for the title, I'm adding that down there. And I'm going to use some more gesso, this time as an inking agent, namely giving more definition and framing the letters. Just want to add another butterfly. Again, instead of using ink to add white accents to the letters and now the papers, I'm using gesso, using it with my finger on the flowers, giving them some more accents. So again, this is another way to use gesso, almost like you would use ink. And on the edges of the paper and even the photo, gives it more dimension, gives it more interest. Corners there. And I also want to add gesso on all the edges of the paper, again using it as ink, but just using gesso and my finger, framing the entire paper, the entire page. That really adds that final touch to it. It's really cool. So we see how versatile gesso is, and you have so many more ways to use it, which we didn't even cover here. So this is the layout with the recipe completed. 3 ingredients and you get a really beautiful, striking result. You don't need fancy embellishments and supplies and materials. You just creatively use what you have, and in this case it was 3 paper flower techniques, 2 stencils, and 1 acrylic medium, which was gesso. So I want to thank everyone for joining me. I had a really great time. Please subscribe and I'll see you next time.